In this video we'll explore the Loguru package in Python. This is a package that provides a lot of very useful utilities for logging, and it's much easier to set up than the standard library's logging package. And Loguru is the most popular third-party logging framework in Python. In this video we're going to see the core features of Loguru, and we're going to see how we can set it up with 𝗵𝗽𝗀 for centralization and monitoring of our log output. And if you're interested in seeing how to integrate Loguru with Django or FastAPI or other frameworks, let us know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this content, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Let's dive in. Now let's start by looking at the Loguru GitHub page here, and as we can see at the top right, this package has 17,400 stars. So we're talking about a very popular package in the Python ecosystem for logging, and it's actually the most popular third-party package for logging. Now why would you want to use Loguru over the standard library logging package? The argument that's presented here is that Loguru is more enjoyable and more user-friendly, and when you use Loguru, it's very easy to set up logging. You simply import the logger object from the package, and then you can start using it immediately. And that's a bit easier to set up and configure than the standard library's logging package. So we're going to dive into the Loguru package in this video, and we're going to see exactly how it makes logging so easy in Python. Now before we go on, let's also mention the 𝗵𝗽𝗀 guide on Loguru. There will be a link to this below the video, and we're going to reference this article throughout the video. Now let's start by opening VS Code, where we have an empty app.py file, and I have a virtual environment activated here, and what we're going to do is we're going to install the Loguru package using the pip install Loguru command. So let's run that, and we're going to install the package. I've already installed it on this system, and as it said in the documentation, it's very simple to get started. We just need to import the logger object from Loguru. So let's paste that in here. And when we have the logger object, we can use log level methods on that object. For example, logger.info to output an info log record. And these log level methods take a message as a parameter. So I'm going to paste a very simple message here. And we can do the same, let's say, with another log level. So as well as logger.info, we have other levels, and I'm going to use logger.error as well. And we also pass a message into that method. Now once we've added those lines of code, we can run the program. So we're going to run the python app.py command, and it's going to output those log entries. And you can see the default format here for the output with Loguru. And we also get some different colors here for different parts of the message, and some of those are contingent on the log level as well. So for example, the error log is colored red here, and the info log is simply white. Now we can change the format, and we're going to do that in a second, but you can see, for example, how easy it is to get started with Loguru. We just import the logger, and we can already start defining those log level methods. Now let's get back to the 𝗵𝗽𝗀 article, and I want to scroll down here and look at the sidebar. We're going to explore some of the log level methods that are available in Loguru. Now log levels are an important concept in logging, and we did a video on that which should be appearing on the screen now. But basically a log level specifies the severity of a log record, and that allows those logs to be filtered or prioritized based on how urgent they are. And there are 7 unique log levels in Loguru. We have trace, we have debug, info, success, warning, error, and critical. And we saw 2 of those here when we used logger.info and logger.error. But for example, if we wanted to log out a critical error, what we can do is we can use the logger.critical method, and that's going to add that level of critical to that log record. Now I'm going to remove that, we're not going to use that. We're now going to move on, and we're going to look at the formatting that's available when you use Loguru. So let's go back to the GitHub page for Loguru, and we're going to look at the formatting section here. So if we look at the list of features here, I'm going to click the second one, and we'll be taken to that section. And you can see that in order to add a handler, or to set up formatting, or to set up a filter, what we need to do is we need to use one single function in Loguru, and that's the logger.add function. So the logger.add function will be used to register what's called a sync, and these are responsible for managing log messages contextualized with a record dictionary. And a sync can be something like a function, it can be a string path, for example, to a file, or it can be some kind of built-in handler or a coroutine function as well. So we're going to see an example of this now. In order to configure the logger, we're going to use the logger.add method. So let's go back to VS Code, and at the top, just before we define that, I'm going to import Python's system module. So let's import that at the top. And just before we define these log level methods, we're going to use the logger.add method. So we're going to register a sync here, and we're just going to pass system.standardout, and that's going to send the log records to the terminal. And in order to specify a format, we can pass that format keyword argument to the logger.add method. And I'm just going to copy the example from the GitHub page just to show what we can do here. So let's copy this string that we're passing to the format argument, and we're going to paste that in here. So we're telling Loguru here that for this logger we want to output the time and the level, and then we want to output the message as well. And I'm going to add some dashes here just to make sure that this is doing what we expect it to do, and therefore we expect those dashes to appear in the output. So let's now rerun this application, and we can look at the messages that we are getting here. Now we can see the log output here that we got before with the colors attached to the messages. But we're also getting the output here in the format that we specified with the timestamp, the log level here, and then the message. Now the question is, why are we getting two outputs? That's because Loguru is also outputting with the default logger configuration, and we can remove that by using another method on the logger, and that's the logger.remove method. So I'm going to save this and we can rerun the application, and now we only see the log entries with the format that we specified. We've removed the default configuration, and we've added a handler that's sending the logs to standard output with this particular format, and all of that is done in Loguru using this logger.add method. Now this format here can be customized even further. There are different parameters that we can use, or different directives that we can use here, and we can also change the output format. For example, for the timestamp, I'm going to pass another timestamp in here, and I'm just going to paste that in here for brevity. We're changing the output format of that timestamp, so when we rerun the application we get a different output format for that time. So it's possible to customize the format of these log messages and also what kind of fields appear in the output. And if you're outputting to the terminal, and that's what we're doing here with standard output, you can actually change the color of these output messages and different parameters here. And we can do that by using some HTML-like syntax. So for example, if we want to output the message in the color green, we can use this green directive, and we can end that here. When we rerun this application at the bottom, we now see that the messages are appearing here with the color green. So if you have a particular directive and you want to give it a particular color, you can do that using Loguru, using this syntax here. And we can also do things like make the color of the message dependent on the log level that's being output. So I'm going to do that here by changing this HTML thing to level, and we can end that here. And this time we're going to see a different color for the output. The info message is in white and the error is now in red, and that color has been customized by using this level. So there are a lot of options when you use the logger.add method and you use the format keyword argument. You can pass fields or directives, and you can pass formats for those, and you can also specify colors. Now let's move on. We're going to show something different now. What if you want your logs to be in a structured output? For example, in JSON format. Now before I do that, I'm going to restructure these parameters so that we can see this line by line. And in order to output the logs in JSON format rather than just plain text, what we can do is very simple here. We just pass a serialize parameter to logger.add, and for this sync it's going to output in JSON format if we set that to true. So let's now rerun the code here, and we can see now that we get some JSON output at the bottom. And if we look at the fields that are in this data, for example for this error record here, we get some textual output, and that contains the output format that we specified with the date time, the log level, and this message which says an error occurred. And we also get some additional information here that appears in that JSON output. So let's go back to the program. If you want to customize the output format of the JSON data, I'm going to reference this BetterStack article, and we can go to the section on formatting log records. And this page gives you more information on the kind of directives that you can use in the format keyword argument. But we're going to scroll down here, and there's a section on using a structured format. And as it says here, you just need to pass serialize equals true in order to get the JSON output. But if you need to customize that, you can define a Python function, and you can extract the fields that you need from that JSON data in that function, and you can pass in the function for extracting that JSON data into the logger.patch method. So this particular example is getting the timestamp, the message, and the level, and it's going to output that as JSON data. And then we have a function here called patching that takes in a log record, and this will call that serialize method above and pass the record in, and the result that's returned, the JSON data, is going to be set here in the record, and it's going to do that at the extra key, and then within the extra key we have a serialized key that's going to be set to that JSON data. So it's very easy with Loguru to customize the output structure of that JSON data and what fields you want to appear in the data. Let's now move on. We're going to look at setting a minimum log level here, And again, this is all done with the logger.add method. What we're going to do is we're going to set the minimum level here by passing a level keyword argument, and I'm going to set that for demonstration purposes to warn. Now when you set the level on a particular logger, this means that any entries that are below that log level, for example the info level here is not as severe as the warn level, these are going to be thrown away by the logger. So let's see an example of that now, and I'm going to remove the serialize parameter here so that we can see this clearly, and we're going to run this app.py file. And we have the message that the level warn does not exist, and that's my mistake. This should be warning, not warn. So let's try that again. We're going to clear the terminal and we're going to run the application. Now this time we see we only get the error output. We don't get the logger.info message, and that's because the info level is not as severe as the warn level, and therefore this is not going to be output by this particular logger. Now if I change this level to something like debug, which is lower in severity than info, and we rerun this, we're going to see that we get both of the messages. So for each logger that we have here, we can customize the level that we want to appear in the output for that logger, so the only log entries with that level or above are going to be output by that logger. Now it's also possible in Loguru to add multiple handlers, and all we need to do in order to do that is define another logger.add method and set up that handler with whatever configuration we need. So let's do that now. We're going to add another call to logger.add, and let's say that this time we want the output to go to a file. So I'm going to define a path here, and it's going to be for a file called app.log, and we want the output in that file to be in JSON format. So I'm going to pass the serialize parameter and set that to true. So now if we look at the program, we have two calls to logger.add. The first one is going to standard output with this particular format, and the second one is going to the app.log file on the file system. Now that doesn't exist at the moment if we look at the left hand side, but what we're going to do at the bottom is run this script here, and it's going to appear on the left hand side as you can see now. So we still get the messages output here to standard output, and that's coming from this first logger here, but we have another one now, and that's this one here that's outputting messages in JSON format to the app.log file. So it's very easy in Loguru to set up multiple handlers, and we can have as many as we like in our applications. Now what about adding custom context to our log entries? At the moment, if we look at, for example, this here, we have very specific keys and values appearing in this output, but we can add our own custom entries to that output. And there are two ways of doing this in Loguru, and we're going to see both now. Now before you start logging contextual data, you need to make sure you have another directive specified in your format. So I'm going to add that directive at the end here, and it's called extra. So any extra keys and values that you add to the log output are going to be captured in this object here. Now in order to create a logger that has some contextual information, we can use a method on the logger object, and that's the bind method. So I'm going to create a variable here just below these logger.add methods. It's going to be called child logger, and we can call the logger.bind method, and what we pass in here is any number of keyword arguments that define the keys and values of extra contextual data that we want to output in our log records. So as an example, imagine we had a web service and we want to output the user ID for a particular request. Let's set it to 1 here. All we're doing is setting a keyword argument called user ID and the value here of 1. And I'm going to set another one, and let's call that IP address. And I'm just going to set that to a value here. And we can pass as many of these keys and values as we want to the logger.bind method, and then we can use that child logger when we call functions such as info and error or any other log level method. So let's change the logger call here to use this child logger, and then at the bottom I'm going to expand the terminal and we're going to run the application, and you can see now that the output contains that extra data with keys and values. We have the user ID set to 1, and we also have the IP address here set to this value here. And if we look at the app.log file, let's look at the output here. What we're going to search for here is the extra dictionary, and that's one of the keys that's passed to this. Now the top two records here, they have an empty dictionary for the extra key because we previously called the application without passing contextual information. But the bottom two records, these have a dictionary for the extra key that contains some keys and values that match what we passed to the logger.bind method. So these new fields that we add with the logger.bind method, they appear in the output in the extra dictionary. Now there's another way of adding custom keys and values to a logger. So let's start by changing these back to the normal logger object that we had. and I'm going to comment this line of code out above here. Now what we can do is we can use a function on the logger, and that's the contextualize function. And this can be used as a Python context manager. So we're going to use the with statement. And all I'm going to do is copy the keys and values that we passed to the bind method, and we can pass them into the contextualize method here, and then we can tab these over into the context manager, and that's going to then add these keys and values to the output for these log records. So this is a more temporary way of doing things. Only the statements that are within the context manager are going to have the new keys and values, the contextual data, added to the output. So let's save this, and I'm going to rerun the application now, and you can see we still get the output here containing the user ID and the IP address. Now let's move on to another section of the video where we're going to look at logging errors. Now errors are very often a target for logging, and if you have anything that goes wrong in your application, you want your log entries to tell you about that problem, so it's important to understand how to output exceptions to your log entries. And Loguru provides ways to do this, and we're going to explore a couple of these now. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define a Python function that is going to cause an exception. So let's remove the logger.contextualize context manager for now, and what we're going to do is define a function called readFile that takes a file name. And what we want to do in this function is we want to open the file name, and we want to read that file and return it to the caller. So let's return the file.read method in Python. And we're hoping that this function here is going to return the contents of the file when this function is called with a given file name. Now of course the problem that might happen here is that a file name might not exist, or it might not be able to be opened if the application does not have the permissions to read that file. So what I'm going to do below here is call this function with a file that does not exist on the file system in this directory. So let's call the function like that, and I'm going to run the application, and we can see at the bottom here that we're getting an error, and that's that there's no such file or directory called input.txt. So this is causing a problem, and we want this to appear in our output logs so that we can diagnose the problem and address it as quickly as possible. So how do we log out errors or exceptions? And again, Loguru provides a couple of different ways to do this. One of them is to use a context manager, and that's the logger.catch method. We can use that as a context manager, and then when we execute a piece of code within that context manager, if any exceptions are raised within that code, it's going to output them to the logs. So let's try that out now. We're going to run app.py, and this time we're getting some different output here for our log entry. We get the error log here, and that's the default level when we use logger.catch like this. And the message is that an error has been caught in the function, and it gives you information about where exactly this error has been raised. For example, line 21 in the app.py file. And this will also be output to the app.log file that we have. So if we look at the bottom record, we can see a different message here, an error has been caught, and this is in JSON format, and we get again a reference to exactly where this exception has been triggered in the application. And if we scroll to the right even further, we can get information here about the type of exception that's been raised. So for example, a file not found error. So we can go into our logs and we can find any examples of these exceptions. And again, if we go back to the BetterStack article, there's a section on this article on logging errors with Loguru. We can see the example here where we use the context manager, and that's the logger.catch method. And if we scroll down a bit further here, we can see that the catch method can take different parameters that allow you to customize its behavior. For example, you can pass an exception parameter that specifies one or more exception types that should be intercepted by the catch method. And when you have these errors, you can change the default level from error to something else if you catch that exception. And again, there'll be links to this below the video so you can read through the different options. Now there's another way to do this in Loguru. We can use logger.catch not only as a context manager, but also as a decorator. So again, let's see an example of that. If we go back to app.py, I'm going to remove the context manager, and I'm going to cut the name of the function here. And then if we go back up to our function definition, we can decorate that with the logger.catch decorator. And that's going to apply the same logic when we execute this code to catch any exceptions that arise during this function. So let's run python app.py, and again we're seeing the error data here in the output. Now note the level here is error, that's the default when we use logger.catch, but just to show an example of the customization, we can pass a level keyword argument here, and I'm going to set that to critical. So any exceptions that are caught here and outputted are going to have the level of critical now. So let's clear the terminal and rerun this. And if we scroll up here, we can see we now have an output with the log level of critical. Let's now move on. We're going to see some very basic log rotation that you can use with Loguru. Now, log rotation applies to files, so we have a log sync here that points to the app.log file. And when you have a sync that points to a file, you can apply some file-specific options to the logger.add method. So we're going to see one of these now, and that's the rotation argument. Now, just to demonstrate this, I'm going to set it to a very short time frame. We want to rotate the log files every 5 seconds. And for this example, I'm going to remove the code that's reading the file, and I'm going to bring back the context manager that has some custom keys and values in it, and also logs out a debug and error message. So let's run python app.py, and we can see the output at the bottom. But if we look at the left hand side, we now have a file that contains a timestamp. And if we look at that, it's got all of the log messages that we've been working with in this video. But if we now run the application again, it's going to create a second file. And the original file that we see here has now been rotated, and any file that contains a timestamp has been rotated. The app.log file at any given time is the file that the application is sending its output to. So the log entries will be sent to the app.log file, and anytime we run this, if the rotation period has expired, it's going to create a new log file and it's going to send the old logs to that new file. So to demonstrate that one more time, this app.log file has our current log entries, but these entries are going to be rotated because the rotation time of 5 seconds has now expired, and these entries are going to be moved to a file that contains a timestamp. They are being rotated and the app.log file will be regenerated. So let's run it one more time, python app.py, and at the left hand side we should see a new file has appeared, and our current file contains our log output from the most recent run. Now, if you're doing a lot of log rotation on your server, you might find that your log files are building up here, and you have a lot of different log files that have been rotated that are taking up a lot of space on the server. And you might want to only keep, let's say, the 2 most recent log files on the server. What we can do if we want to set that configuration with Loguru is we can pass another argument to the logger.add method. As well as rotation, we can specify a retention argument. And there are different options here for this. We can specify a string or an integer or a time delta. What I'm going to do for the retention keyword argument is pass in another time frame here, and that's 10 seconds. Now what this is going to do is it's going to look at all of the files that have been rotated that contain the timestamps, and it's going to remove any rotated log files that were generated more than 10 seconds ago. So the retention period is 10 seconds, and all of these log files that we see on the left hand side, these were generated more than 10 seconds ago. So I'm going to rerun this application, and if we look at the left hand side, we now don't get those rotated files. If I run it again, we see we don't get anything again here. One more time, we're going to get a file here that was generated, and that's because more than 5 seconds has elapsed. So the original file will be rotated, but the retention period is 10 seconds. So if we run this one more time, we're going to see that that file disappears. So Loguru provides these very simple mechanisms for rotating log files and to specify the retention of log files on your server. And of course, in a real application, you would set these to much higher values than 5 and 10 seconds. This is just for demonstration purposes. Now let's finish the video by looking at how we can monitor our logs using Loguru, but also using 𝗵𝗽𝘁𝗲 for log centralization. Now, logging to the terminal and to files on your server, that's good for development, but in production, you want to centralize your logs and have a permanent place that can be accessed by your team in order to view those logs and diagnose any issues, and also for analysis and searching purposes. So let's go to the browser, and I'm going to bring up the 𝗵𝗽𝘁𝗲 platform, and we're on the logs section here, and you can get that at the top left. We go to logs and metrics, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a source. Now, what is a source? This represents services that you want to collect logs from. And in order to create one, we can click this button at the top right, and let's give it a name of Loguru Demo. Now, the platform for this is going to be Python, because this is a Python-based application. We can create the source, and we're going to get back this page here. Now, the important thing we need to note from this page is the token. So we're going to copy that. And speaking of retention, we have a default retention here of 3 days. And depending on the plan that you have, you can change this and set the retention period to something else. But we're going to keep it at that for this demo. And now that we've copied the token, let's go back to the app.py file, and I'm going to define a variable here, and I'm going to paste this token into the script. Now, in a real application, you want to extract that to an environment file. So make sure you don't commit that token to GitHub or any other source control system. Once we have the token, we can go back to the browser and we're going to use the 𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃 Python driver. So let's scroll down and we're going to copy this pip install command, and this page will be linked below the video, so if you need to copy this, just check out the description. Let's go back to the terminal. In our Python virtual environment, we're going to copy that pip install command, and once we've installed those packages, we can start to use the logtail handler that's provided by 𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃. So I'm going to scroll down to this section on logging from Python. We've already installed the driver. Let's now look at the setup section. What we need to do is import the logtail handler at the top. So let's copy this line of code and I'm going to paste that at the top here. And once we've imported the logtail handler, we can instantiate that, and I'm going to call the variable handler. So let's instantiate the logtail handler, and we need to pass the source token in as a keyword argument. And we're setting that equal to the token that we copied from the 𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃 page. And once we've got the handler here, it's very simple to configure this with Loguru. All we need to do is call logger.add one more time. So let's copy this line of code, and we're going to add logger.add here, and we're going to pass in our handler that we just created as an argument. So I'm going to pass some extra keyword arguments in here. For example, let's specify the format, and we're going to use the same format that we had above, and I'm going to paste that in here just below, but we're going to remove the color here, we don't need that. And let's set the level here to debug so that we can see the debug output that we've got here below. So in order to send the logs to 𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃, we just define a logtail handler here, and we instantiate that with the source token. And once we have that, we just call the Loguru add method and pass our handler into that along with any normal configuration for the log entries. So I'm going to run this application a couple of times, and it's going to generate some log outputs. And you can see these are being output to the terminal and also to the file here. But what I'm going to do now is go back to the browser, and we're going to go back to 𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃 and look at the live tail for these logs. And you can see these entries coming through here. We have the log output that we just generated, and you can see the format of that on the 𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃 platform. So each log entry has a level associated with it, and that's very clearly indicated on this page. And if we want to do some basic filtering, we can just click the level as an example. So to only get the error logs, we can just click that level, and we're taken to this page that filters down the logs to only those with the error level. Now let's drill into this output a little bit more. If we look at the output that we have here, we can see the extra data that we added, the IP address and the user ID. That's appearing in the log output here. So if we wanted to search for this, and that might be a case of the user with the ID of 1 is emailing in and saying they have an issue with the system, we can filter down the logs to only the entries for that particular user. And we can do that by looking at the extra.userid property, and let's set this to 1 and see what we get back here. That gives us back the logs that are associated with the user that has that ID, and that ID is coming from the extra contextual data that we added to the logs. So 𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃 allows you to consolidate your logs in a central location, and it allows you to search and filter through these logs, as well as build things like dashboards and analytics around the log output. And this can be applied not only to a single source of data, but to multiple sources and then combined in order to get insights into your entire production stack. So that's all for this video. We've shown how to use the Loguru package in Python, and it's the most popular third-party package because it's a very simple package to use for logging. We just import a logger object, we define some syncs using the logger.add method that send our logs to a particular location with a particular format, and that's basically all we need to do. And of course there are more advanced options for logging out errors and exceptions, and logging out contextual data, as well as specifying filters for our logs. If you're interested in log filtering or any other topics around logging in Python, let us know in the comments of this video, and make sure to give the video a thumbs up on YouTube and subscribe to 𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃 if you've not already done so. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.